Welcome back to another episode of 8-Minute Methodism. My name is Dr. Jonathan Lemaster Smith, or Dr. J if you prefer, because my name's 27 letters long. The goal of this show is to make Methodism make sense for all of y'all. And today, I'm wearing my General Conference 2020 shirt because, well, it got rescheduled several times, but we're still covering what General Conference 2020 was supposed to do, and we keep the same name because Methodists do it weird sometimes. The focus of today's episode is to look at some of the key legislative goals of this General Conference. Now, I will not be covering every petition. I couldn't make enough videos to cover every petition because there are 1,099 petitions coming to the General Conference as part of this. Instead, I'm going to focus on 4 key areas. The first 3 are what you might see being called the 3 R's. That is, to regionalize, revise, and remove. You may see this on some people's social media profile pictures or in posts. What these 3 things are looking to do is regionalize the denomination to be more contextual, revise the social principles, and remove restrictive language around LGBTQ issues. The 4th thing I want to focus on briefly is clergy formation in the 21st century, because there are people working hard to make sure we better understand what it means to be clergy in the current age. We're going to start with regionalization. Regionalization in the United Methodist Church is already sort of here. Central conferences, which are bodies outside the United States, already have the ability to adapt portions of the Book of Discipline to make sense in their context. The reality is, though, that as the United Methodist Church, we often act like the United States Church with satellite campuses in different parts of the world. What we would do here is instead create a general book of discipline with the core things like our Constitution, like the doctrinal and social principles. Those would be constant throughout the denomination. But the portions of the book of discipline that focus on things like local church membership, educational requirements for clergy, as well as many other things would be able to be contextually altered to make sense in the regions. If this goes through, this would be the first time the United States has had the ability to alter the Book of Discipline from its main general format as part of this. The other reality we see there is it does away with the language of central conferences because these are often conflated with the central jurisdiction, a jurisdiction created in the 1930s out of racist passions that segregated out the black churches and black pastors from all the other churches within the denomination. This would get rid of that language and give the United States, as well as other regions around the world, the ability to contextually interpret the Book of Discipline. Now remember, it will not be removing the Constitution or any of our theological language, but more so allowing regions to be able to make decisions that make sense for their context around various issues. Second, we are looking to revise the social principles. Our social principles are our statements around many social concerns that you all may think about. Creation care, human rights, war, poverty, those sort of things, and many others. We have a social principle with the language soil or dirt in it. I'm serious. We cover everything as parts of that. However, like I said previously, our social principles are very U.S.-centric because we act like a U.S. church with regional satellite campuses outside of us. In the 2012 General Conference, I believe, the Board of Church and Society was tasked with revising the social principles to be more global and inclusive in focus. And in order to do this, they brought in people from essentially every continent where there are United Methodists. They brought people in from Europe, from Africa, and from Asia, along with the United States, in order to begin to revise these social principles to be more global in scope. Now, what they also did, which I really like, is add in more theological and scriptural basis for this. I regularly call the social principles philosophical treatises that operate near the Bible and near theology because it's often written more like just a social statement. The new revised versions that you can go online and read actually begin each section with usually a sermon by John Wesley or another one of his writings, and then are just littered with scriptural references. We are not only making our social principles global, but grounding them more in the scripture and tradition that we hold dear as a denomination. And then there is the removal of restrictive language goal. What this would do is remove restrictive language around LGBTQIA+ or queer persons. I'll use that language more frequently because it's just easier to say in the Book of Discipline. That would include removing the restrictive language that says homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and making our definition of marriage more inclusive, removing the restrictions on queer clergy, on queer bishops, on queer weddings, as part of that in order to make the Book of Discipline more inclusive. What this does not do is force any pastor who does not want to do a queer wedding to do a wedding. Pastors have always been able to determine who they do weddings for as part of that. It also does not force annual conferences to ordain someone just because they are queer. What it does do is allow annual conferences to make decisions based on who they see as qualified for ministry, not based on any restrictions placed on them because of their sexuality, just like we've in the past placed restrictions based upon gender and sex, race, those sort of things, and then puts the ownership of deciding who is ordained on the annual conference and not on restrictions in a book. It also removes some of the judicial issues as well as some of the bans on funding that are present as part of that. But again, what it does not do is force anybody to change their beliefs, and instead lets people know that we are a church that is going to welcome in people into all aspects of church life, and we may disagree about it on different levels, but we are going to acknowledge that all people are made in the image of God and that God works in the ways that God is going to work. Finally, I want to talk about clergy formation. Clergy formation in the 21st century is getting more interesting, rich, and complex. First, there are petitions coming forward that would remove restrictions on mandatory retirement and restrictions on people of a certain age from pursuing education and ministry credentials. Presently, we have a retirement age set at 72, and this is mandatory. So many people who feel called to ministry may not be able to finish up a degree, start a course of study, or even seek connection with the denomination on a ministerial level because of these restrictions. Instead, these petitions would modify them to allow people, even as they approach retirement, to continue to pursue education, serve in ministry, and perhaps even pursue ordination as part of that. Some of the petitions would also grant full sacramental rights to deacons, who currently can only preside over the sacraments when given permission by the bishop. This would allow for them to preside over the sacraments in the same way that elders can preside over the sacraments as part of this. Other parts of this may even give local church pastors, which are an increasing number of our clergy, more rights, as they are not currently afforded some of the same rights as elders and deacons in our denomination, even though they serve many of our churches, and in some situations and in some annual conferences, there are more local pastors than there are ordained clergy. So we need to begin the conversation around revising our understanding of the local pastor. Finally, there is work being done that would put more responsibility and power in determining the ordination requirements as well as the educational requirements of clergy on the annual conference, as opposed to the University Senate and the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry, which is our general agency that works to have consistent standards for ordination, education requirements, those sort of things, and would put more responsibility, if not all responsibility, on annual conferences engaging in the process of educating and licensing and ordaining clergy. What I'm seeing here, and this is my analysis, is that we are trying to have the conversations we need to have to be a church that honors God and exists within the 21st century in all the different contexts we have. I believe this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of something. That we are beginning to do the work that God has called us to, renewed and refreshed and hoping for a future together. If you like this video or my other videos, I encourage you to give us a like on YouTube, to subscribe. I also encourage you to, if you liked it, share it with people. Share it through your Facebook, through word of mouth, wherever you go, because I'm still just getting started. And after General Conference, I'm going to have a whole slew of other videos that are going to be fun as part of that. I'll put my contact information up here like I always do, and put a bunch of different links in the description to get you to all the legislation. I'll link to all the big legislations and some of the descriptions I've used for part of that. Thank you to all the people who I read, and I'll put citations to them in the notes below. And again, I'm here to educate, to inform, to make it make sense. Onward to perfection, y'all.